to things. I knew Spencer, as he did, would do a wonderful job explaining the sort of hands-on sketching process from thoughts to things. And so I take a step back a little bit and explain a little bit how I approach projects more from a traditional industrial design perspective, because that's how I was trained and that's sort of my passion. And historically, we usually start projects with words, and those are in the form of a script or a narrative or a marketing brief. Then a lot of times pictures generate ideas and inspiration, and that falls into classically what we call mood boards and things like that. Or just surfing the internet, you're on Pinterest, you're on Google, all those sorts of things. Pretty classic way for people to pull images to inspire ideas. We also do field trips, things like that. And then in the end, we end up with models. And this is where we would transition into something like Gravity Sketch and start to show, like with architecture, physical models, really any profession. A great way to get people to understand something is through looking at a model. So when I start projects, there's these are my three big topics to get right before I go and draw or generate any ideas. So first is the interpretation of the project. And what I find super important here is that you need, and this is sort of throughout all industrial design sketching and idea generating for myself, is that you need to shift your POV. And what I mean by that is that if you want to increase your ability to interpret the deeper meaning and stay on point and on target for the goal of the project, it starts here. So really understanding what people want in the narrative or the marketing brief, or what's the business goal of the things you're going to draw and design, and how do the things you're inventing fulfill those business goals. It really gives you a framework to hang on and a structure that when you're alone in your studio and you're working or even at work with a team, you're always considering the bigger picture and finding appropriate solutions for your customer. So that's sort of number one, get the interpretation right. Then research. This is getting to know your customer, of course, but who's your end audience in the case of entertainment design? Or you might be illustrating a book, so you have a reader as your end audience. So you need to get to know them, what their desires are, what their interests are, so that you're also trying to work appropriately towards fulfilling those goals. And then lastly is anatomy. And then the anatomy is really what I call sort of this broad term about like what makes up the thing that you're trying to design that solves or fulfills the interpretation of the written brief or goal from the beginning, from the interpretation step. So anatomy is kind of a deeper understanding of how the thing is built. It could also be about a project. What's the end desire of the customer? So interpretation, these are some of the things I keep in the back of my mind. Communication is super critical to running a project smoothly. So a lot of times what I do after being presented with a new idea to go and design is I try to summarize that meeting in my own words, and then I try to present it back to people to say, hey, this is what I took out of that meeting or that market briefing, or if I have a client meeting offsite and we just had a coffee and they were describing something to me, before I start to draw, I try to summarize it and say, hey, this is what I took out of that get together we had. Does this seem right? And then I try to simplify and try and find clarity. And all of this goes towards, I think, being quite productive in your creative work. And then I try and derive the action tasks from the fuzzy meeting notes and all the ideas that are flying around a room, because typically a concept designer or industrial designer are sort of the first people to put pen to paper and to materialize all the dialogue that was happening in a meeting. And then ultimately you ask, what are my skills that I can bring to this R&D effort or this goal or project? And then try and maybe even put a Post-it on your desk. Say, I'm really good at these three things. I'm going to really try and push That's where I think I could help the most in this project. Where you know that you're weaker, put those down as well and say, this is where I'm going to reach out for help from other people. So anatomy, how would you learn about anatomy? And when I say anatomy, I'm not talking about organic anatomy, well, I am, but also talking about mechanical anatomy. So what I see missing in a lot of drawings and paintings and things online is that there's a lack of understanding of how things are built physically. And so as a result, they never ever really look convincing to me or real. And then if you really want to go build something, you hadn't considered that. And so it's really tough to make that step. So this is one I would suggest. How it's made is a TV show on the Science Channel. Looks like there's 300 videos. I took this screen grab. These are pretty awesome. And you learn all sorts of crazy stuff that you would never have considered. But what it does is it starts to inform your ability on making things look real. So when you start to sketch and draw, you have this richer understanding of how things go together. Always is this in the back of my mind, is question everything. So the idea of, and this is going to carry over into the newer tool sets like Gravity Sketch and especially AI, but these are kind of just a short list of some of the questions I'm always asking myself. Again, may not be a bad idea to write some notes, stick them on your wall near your desk. And I'm not going to go through them all in depth, but these are a few. How can it be built? Who is it for? Does it solve any of our problems? Since I spent time at Apple, of course, where's the magic? Who is it for? And then honestly, at the very beginning, even back at the interpretation phase, you should be asking, should we even be doing this? Like, does this make any sense for a consumer or, our customer base or our business model? So when you question everything, are there ways that you can become more creative? I loved Hussein had an awesome book. I now need to order it, but his innovation book from yesterday's talk, I really want one of those. But this is also a great book put together by one of my old students, Friedlin, put together this awesome little guidebook on how to think creatively. And it covers a lot of the things that I taught when he was in my class, but also he's done a great job at reinterpreting those and explaining them in a really nice way. So I would highly suggest this little book, Creative Strategies. It's a Design Studio Press book from my old publishing company, but super helpful if you're struggling with developing strategies on how to tackle creativity. So this would be an example of a project, sort of a very classic approach, where I do some drawings on the left, I do some color renderings of a thing in the middle, and then I would start building the thing on the right. And so for the people that have been following my Instagram channel, this is my hot rod truck that we're building called the Fortress. Trusses, of course, because of the bed of the truck is all trusses. And it is a 1934 Ford. But that's sort of historically, this has been my classic, development cycle. Research, learn anatomy, understand the brief, draw, render, build. So those kind of 3 steps. And of course, you're caught in these loops back and forth from drawing to rendering. There's lots of development loops, but simply put, that's kind of it. Move from sketch to rendering to model. Now with the advent of Gravity Sketch and working in VR, I'm still doing the sketch to model, but now I kind of get the rendering for free a little bit. If I want to modify this rendering, of course, it helps that I have traditional rendering skills, so I can go into Photoshop. I can now improve the model much faster than going back and making cut lines and things in Gravity Sketch. I would just do all that in Photoshop. So I think that having the traditional foundation skills when making this jump gives you sort of an additional layer of superpowers on how to modify the digital content that gets created through this path. Now you'll see on the right, you see the little hand sketches there in the upper left corner for almost all of those hot rods. And so I find that in order to capture the gesture and proportion, I'm much more effective to work on paper and then bring the sketch into Gravity Sketch, lock it to the center line, And then I can just retrace my wireframe drawing right off my original drawing. And it has the proportions that I like in my hand sketch. And the big reason I find it advantageous to work that way is that it's much easier for me to see the overall proportion when the sketch is small. When I'm in Gravity Sketch, when I want to get far away from an object to see the proportions, it gets too blurry and it makes it really difficult. So I lose fidelity in headset to properly evaluate the proportions. So if you're just doing a draft view, I find this super helpful hint is to capture your gesture and proportion here and then jump into 3D. There's a little sneak peek of something I did the last couple weeks in Gravity Sketch. This is my future backyard studio. So upper left, Gravity Sketch model. Lower left, previous work in progress model that was rendered in Octane. And then there in top view, you can see I have in the lower left side there a nice little space I'm designing for lots of VR space. It's not a very large space. It's only 850 square feet or something. But anyway, hopefully build that next spring. Of course, the beauty of this and working in VR is I've already been in there. I've already experienced it 1-to-1 scale. In fact, I took a picture of the trees in my backyard and wrapped it around this. So when I'm inside looking out the windows, I see the actual view. So it's ridiculous. It's just awesome to work in VR. Another example of going Gravity Sketch in VR and then rendered in Octane. Again, this is a nice example, I think, of anatomy. I built everything from the inside out. So I have all the decks, I have all the furniture, I have the room dimensions, just like the studio build. And this is where if you know the anatomy, then jumping into VR makes it much, much, much simpler to advance an idea directly in VR. So this had one very loose little thumbnail sketch, just like the cars, and then jumped right in and started building out. Okay, we can't do, it seems like, a talk now about design in the future and the way pipelines and methodologies without talking about AI. So this will be sort of the first time I'm sharing some of the AI experiments I've been doing with some of the more mainstream programs. And what I mean by that is Stable Diffusion, DALL-E 2, Midjourney, all of those. So I have shared some things I've done in Dream by Wombo and Artbreeder through my Instagram and on my ArtStation page. But anyway, these are the apps I've been playing with for the last year and a half, actually. And of course, they have pros and cons, each one. And we'll talk a little bit about that. And we'll hopefully, we got a late start, but I'll try to get quickly into Q&A and we can get into the deeper discussions about the AI tool sets and what they mean for our industry and what they mean for, the way that we work. If you go way back to the beginning and you think about we work from language first, usually words, then imagery, then models, what the AI is starting to be able to do very, very quickly and very, very well, and Spencer brought this up, is that it gets us through the sketch part very fast to where we can start to formulate reactions to imagery. And this I sort of make the analogy to sort of surfing the web when you're on Pinterest or Google. When you get a project and there's some words in there, you click on them and you start to look at imagery, which stimulates inspirational ideas. I find this very, very similar. What I like about this is these are done in Artbreeder. Artbreeder allows me to mix two images. And so, of course, the originality for all the AI images are in the machine learning part and the data set that it pulls from or that it was trained on. And so what I love about Artbreeder is I can completely control the data set. So these are drawings that I have on one side that I did, and my dad's artwork on the other side. And he was a traditional painter. So I have a lot of his brushwork and art technique, and then I could blend between those two. So I could dictate composition with a gray marker sketch, and I could overlay and bring it back with his painting. And that was fun. It was fun to emotionally connect with him since he's been gone for a while. But to blend our two things together and create something new and find something inspiring. So that's what these are examples of. And this is, ultimately, if you want to find originality in AI, you want to modify the data set. And so this is me modifying the data set. And it's only a data set I have access to. These are portraits made in Artbreeder as well. These are royalty-free images I took from unsplash.com. And then I coupled them with gray marker sketches, even just sometimes a black and white Sharpie sketch, to change proportions of the head. So here, all the proportions of the face are being driven by my sort of caricature sketch on one side, and then bringing a photographic art style from the other side. So you get some really interesting results. So my sketch had the really big ears, and that's what I wanted, and sort of chin. These are done in Canvas by NVIDIA. This is where you color code big blocky graphic shapes, and then it will generate these four sort of photographic images. And then I ran the photographic images through another app. I can't remember what, FX something, where you can get watercolor effects, et cetera, just as tests. I do a huge amount of testing and exploration. These really only work if you know how to draw in perspective. So if you know how to draw in perspective, you know how to lay in a horizon line, you know how to work with proportions and composition, then something like this is effective. If you don't have the foundation skills of how to draw in perspective, this becomes pretty loose. It will still look photographic, of course, and be interesting, but you're not going to get very far. Here's an example of Dream by Wombo. Dream by Wombo, I really like because I can start with my traditional media sketch in the upper left, and then I can run some art style variations on it inside their app. And so I always set the sketch influence to really strong, and then I just look for variations. And I usually run about 5 different styles for each sketch. And then I just make a library of these. And then you can, of course, you can cut and paste them together. They're the same sketch. They layer right on top. But look at the variation between those 2 red ones. There's a lot of interesting things there. And I wouldn't call these happy accidents. It's very directed. It's very much done with intent. And I'm picking words in my prompts to enhance my base sketch. They're almost always materials, colors, graphics, shapes, things like that. So this might be highly detailed mechanical parts, rusty red, matte black, for instance. More traditional sketches, modified in Dream by Wombo. Again, a lot of this is on my Instagram. Again, traditional sketches. Now, what I'm finding is that I'm making discoveries and getting very inspired by these results that's starting to affect my traditional media drawing. And I'm like, oh, I want to try that. I want to do that with markers, right? And so it's actually bringing me back more into traditional media work via what I'm seeing inside the imagery that's created with AI. The sketch on the left is a strong influence of my original sketch, and then the sketch on the right is a medium influence or regular influence. And of course, it gets more abstract based on the terminology that you put in. So you can start to get more and more abstraction or chaos in your result. These are Mid-Journey now. This is something like Megalodon meets, forest cabin. I'll just run through these. This is all prompt experimentation and trying to push the boundaries of the style, subject matter, lighting, placement, materials, graphic styles. So I'm doing a bunch of these old 1930s inspired science posters. Texture maps. So I create swatches and texture maps that maybe I'll take back into Modo or something, or even Gravity Sketch, and project them onto surfaces. This is a little cabin series that I've been working on. Another example. I'll finish up with some shoe examples. This is going way back. I did this thing with Rob Baldwin originally for Columbia Sports, where we took images. In the upper left, you'll see a swatch. That's the ceiling of the Detroit airport. And then the middle sketch is a shoe model that we did in Moto. And then that's the swatch projected onto the shoe. And so I did a generator, kind of a early days brute force image generation interface that Rob put together inside Moto. And we could change the UV maps, we could change the repetition and orientation of the images, and then we could easily, within a minute, swap the swatch to a different swatch. Then we run an animation and we get like, well, every frame is a different shoe design. So in this case, we're just trying to affect the graphics of the upper here. So these were straight out of the app. I set up the model to, of course, have in one rendering the top view and the side view. The one in the middle, I added a quick logo just to represent a logo and some laces. And you could do those with actions in Photoshop. So they would just, hit an action button and they would auto load. And here's an example. I could usually ran like 1,000 shoes a day. And this was way pre-AI. This was us acting as AI, as generative manipulators of the image maps and the projection methods to get huge variation on a lower that was fixed for that model season. And we were just looking for graphic inspiration on the upper. And that'll bring us to today. So this again was, I think this is like a 2010. So this is like this is 12 years ago. And now we're here. The prompt is at the top. This is Midjourney version 4, which just came out this last weekend. There's my prompt: high-end product photography, parametric styling, slick, sharp, cool, triangles, orange sole, white sci-fi trail running, futuristic waterproof boot. Right. So the fun you have now, just like sketching, and when you ask the questions, this is where the questions of my traditional methodology come back into the present day AI tool set. What I start to do is just, in the evenings on the iPad or the laptop, I start saying, what if? What if it was a different word? What if it was brutalist styling? What if it was aerodynamic styling? What if it wasn't sharp, but it was soft? What if it was, not futuristic, it was retro? So I usually go in and craft a prompt, changing one word at a time. And now the prompts are the things that I develop, and they take quite a bit of time to get right. So just because the output is really, really fast doesn't mean that the research that goes into trying to craft the prompt doesn't take effort and time to figure out, because they do. So these are examples. And of course, then you can take this into Gravity Sketch, start modeling. There is a very critical question to be answered with this tool set nowadays for any company, which is around copyrights, because I'm not a shoe person. And my assumption would be that these are all new and original. But if you are a shoe person, you might see a shoe that the machine learning was trained on, and you know where it came from. And so you're going to look at it and say, oh, that looks just like last year's whomever's brand. That must have come from a photo of their shoe. And so if I was a company and I was going to think about producing any of these, I would definitely think twice about using the AI tools nowadays. And I would also, in the refinement phase, I would push away from whatever was the original inspiration. So I would really just use them as sketches. But even then, if you're a big company and you get sued a lot, even if you're just using something as inspiration. Of course, designers have used and done that for forever, pulling up images off the internet. Part of it's not new, but part of it is new in that, these companies have made products that they're selling for money, these apps, and, what were they trained on? They were trained on images, mostly photography, that was, copyright protected. So that's a real issue that has to be solved. But it does build on our shared history, just like, we've all done from looking at who's come before us, artists and designers and photographers, filmmakers. And the bigger question about the tool set I have is, where's the originality going to happen if everyone pulls from the same well? And so my dream on the AI side would be the ability for myself to curate my own data set and do the machine learning of the imagery myself. Then I know what's going in. I own. I know it's original, and I know that it will generate results that nobody else can get. And this takes me all the way back to the beginning of the AI things, which was Artbreeder. And then I built a data set of my own with my dad's work and my work, and I mashed them up together. And so for me, that feels the best. It's more satisfying. I know the source imagery is all my own imagery. And so I can imagine if we can get these models to be, less biased and more properly trained on, let artists opt in, et cetera, to clean up that muddy legal path right now, we could have something even better. And also, I can imagine that part of what I could do as a content creator is I could start to create my own AI engines and models that are trained on very specific things that I went out and did a photo trip. I built a data set. Now I can make my own model to sell. So that would be something interesting as a future product for myself, to go out and create those things with an original point of view to share with the world. So I think that is all I had. I do have some other things in the background. Should we want to see more AI examples, I have another 50 slides if there aren't enough questions. But otherwise, I think we should switch over to the questions to sort of get us back on schedule. So let me stop sharing.
Thank you so much for this, Scott. It's beautiful that you're able to now combine your dad's work with yours.
It's crazy. It's really, really crazy.
Cool. All right. So, I mean, you're always kind of like trying to, like, you're always pushing the limits and kind of like trying to experiment with different techniques. And this is something that it's probably the thing that kind of like makes you stand out from the crowd. One thing that I'm getting from all of this that I've actually never thought about you, but it makes total sense, is that you have really blurred the lines between 3D and 2D. Like, you're not making a distinction anymore. It's really all about just like trying to express yourself.
Yeah, I think that comes from being an industrial designer first, right? So I've never, throughout my career, I never made money on selling a specific illustrative style, right? I was never an illustrator by profession. And so I'm more about the creation side and how do we get the tool sets and things, to support that. And so, and I think I've been super fortunate in that, having spent a lot of my time early when I had lots of energy, right? Spending my time in an educational institution like at Art Center, and then I had time to actually experiment. And so I think that I fall under this weird sort of spot where I've always had a chunk of my time dedicated to this, and now it's just become habit.
I want to bring Scott into the conversation. Spencer, Spencer Nugget. He's going to be our guest today for the Q&A session. So yeah, he's coming in. So we'll have a few questions from Spencer, and then we'll have some more from the audience. There's a lot, so probably we won't go through your other 50 images that you had prepared.
No, we have a table thing later, right? So we can do, I'll have a table later at the end of the day.
Yeah. Hey, Spencer.
Hello. They always say never meet your heroes, but here we are. Just kidding. I met Scott a while back, actually. And it's interesting because the Columbia shoes were the first time I saw you leaning into this like tech forward approach to creativity and design. But awesome presentation. You mentioned one thing I thought was interesting. Well, a lot of things, but one thing in particular. You said that seeing what the AI output changes how you create in an analog way effectively, like how you use your markers and so on. Do you have any examples of that, or specifics about
I have
how it's changed?
Yeah, you could go look up David Levy on Instagram.
Okay.
And it goes by Vile, I think is his VYLE, Vile Art, okay. Maybe. Anyway, so he was doing a bunch of things he's posted on that he was doing in disco diffusion. And he's now picked up oil painting after 20 years because he was so inspired to work from the AI images that he was creating. And so I've heard just recently there are more and more people are feeling that feeling and that energy coming out of the images. And I myself as well. It's super fun and it's very addictive actually as well, because you're just changing one word here. You keep asking. If you like to ask that question, like if you're curious, you're in trouble when you get in, because like, oh, what if this? What about that? Right? And then you just run them again. But after a while, then you sort of slow down and you start to take into account this huge library you've made. Then you look back into those ideas and you want to develop them further. And so you can't go back in. You'll never get the exact same result from your prompt. So then you're back into traditional media. And so I have seen people getting very inspired about the ideas in the images and picking up traditional media again.
Yeah, I mean, at a glance, I totally get that, and it's certainly empowering. Like even the leap to digital painting made me want to paint and try and paint. So I can imagine like this is going to create a new set of people who want to paint in those traditional ways. You mentioned that, and I think I alluded to this as well, that our role as designers, creatives, illustrators, whatever, is going to shift a bit more to kind of this very precise, upfront, prompt-based workflow in certain instances. So should designers focus on linguistics and expression and precision in language as part of our new toolkit, moving forward? Or
yeah, your prompting ability will have value. I've already known people offer jobs for their prompting abilities.
Oh wow, fascinating.
So in game doing entertainment design. So again, there are a lot of issues to be resolved around copyright violations and things like that. So I think using it only as a sort of visual research tool at the beginning of a project is sort of acceptable. But even then, if you're a big company, even where you pull your imagery from for inspiration becomes problematic. If anything looks like that in production, people will go fishing, lawyers will go fishing and say, by the way, did you use reference of this artist in this final product, right? And if you did, you're in trouble. So I really think that the ideal situation would be giving authorship control of the data set to the artist. And that means artists getting a little more technical. It means, these software programmers being a little more open on where the images come from, that the machine learning happens with, that sort of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Someone asked me in my session about like, could I create effectively my own library or duplicate of myself, and then maybe that AI subset is doing work on my behalf. Do you envision a future like that as well?
Dude, I wish. I was so frustrated. Right. I was so disappointed. I went into all these AI things and I put in my name and all these references of my past work. I got nothing usable.
Oh no.
Garbage. I was like, oh, that is so upsetting. I got no like mini me to help me get any of this stuff done.
I know that would be incredible, right?
I was like, nothing.
Just relax and be like, hey, you want to hire Scott? Hire my AI.
Nothing. So then that's where the Art Reader thing was more interesting, and Dream by Wombo, because then I could bring in my actual work, right? And then I could manipulate it with these text prompts, especially Dream by Wombo. I can then add some, superfluous sci-fi detailing to an object or change its color, right? I can loosely steer some directions in that. And I find that to be really gratifying. The other thing I like to do is use AI on AI. So I like to generate. So there are some examples on my Instagram. I took disco diffusion images, then I put them into Dream by Wombo, and I modified them even further. And that's actually really effective. So the apps that let you use an image as influence for me are the ones that I find have the most value beyond just, super fast image generation. But wow, is it fun if you have curiosity and you're design minded? It's super fun.
Yeah, some of these experiences seem to be very much front end heavy with how much the AI does as opposed to how much you do as a creator. I look at things like viscom.ai, for example, where there's definite direct input in a more familiar way with what you get. But as you mentioned, you can create an image and then put that through Viscom again and get something different. So it's really interesting.
Yeah, that's the same
But I
with
think
Canvas by NVIDIA, right?
I
I totally control the composition, right? Because I painted the composition.
exactly.
And,
Exactly.
I think for creatives, AI tools that can be done equally by everyone, people without training and without a design eye and that aren't design literate, that those become sort of disheartening for us creatives, right? Because we've invested so much time and learning and knowledge into this skill set. So the ones where we can contain or control a bit more authorship, those feel much better to use.
Yeah, you mentioned with the NVIDIA Canvas is the name, right?
Yeah, Canvas.
That you do have to have some understanding of perspective. Do you see value in having still fundamental skills when using some of these other tools moving forward?
Yeah, big time. Because, one, if I want to extrapolate them into anything more real, until Caden takes over the world and does all that for us. But if I want to go and do that, I lean heavily on the foundation skills. And the people I see doing the most interesting work, turning this into viable artwork for their own production purposes, are the people that have extremely strong traditional media drawing and painting skills. So there's this guy on Instagram, Steve D. McDonald. He went really deep into the AI, and what he's doing is really interesting. He's making bits and pieces of images, like elements, and then he's cutting and pasting them back into Photoshop, and then he's painting back over the top. And so he ends with an image that the AI would not create on its own, right? So he's only pulling elements together. And then because he knows how to draw, he can actually collage them back together into what looks like, a believable perspective. And then he knows lighting and he knows material indication. Now, I would argue that if you want to paint over the output coming out of Midjourney, your rendering skills had better be way
top notch. Yep.
Because all you're going to do probably is make it worse.
Yeah.
So, but you don't want to be at the mercy of the machine and not be able to evolve it and make it better. So I think there's an argument that the 2D rendering skills need to actually get amped up even higher to use that content in an effective manner and to make it stand out and be different than what everybody else can produce.
Do you see, 100%, but do you see a future in which these systems, platforms, networks get so good? Because I look at some of the work and you can just tell some of the perspectives off, or that's not really a circle, that's an ellipse, and it should be a circle. Do you envision a future, and it's only been a few years, where it gets so good that we don't need to do that final touch?
Oh yeah, I've got thousands of images, and sure, there's a whole bunch that are really close to being done. But I want, what am I bringing that's special, right? Because my mom could have run that prompt, right, and generated that. But there's also a huge bridge from 2D image to production product, right? So there, in context of industrial design and making real stuff that solves problems for the world, there's a big jump that happens there. And so we're not getting any closer to that in regards to starting that program with engineers and marketing discussion and tooling expenses and all of those things, right? It only gets, I think but at the beginning process, wow. But again, that's why I run like AI through AI. I'm looking for the magic. Like we always in school, we'd say like, what's the secret sauce, right? Like, what are you bringing? Like, what are you throwing on that gives it that little something?
That's actually a good segue, and I'll end here, Daniela, if I need to peel off with my questions. I've got lots of questions though. With this creative output that we see as product designers, do you feel that, and you mentioned that the AI systems can sometimes be derivative, right? Because they're pulling from maybe the pool of
Well, they
inspiration.
all are. It's whatever they're trained on.
Do you feel like designers are kind of that way too. Like we're trained on
Totally.
these image boards and websites, and
Totally. I can't stand image boards. If I
so
see another image
my
board,
controversial
oh,
question is:
yeah.
Is modern product design somewhat the same and boring? And what should designers do to push against that?
Yeah, I think it is, but it's also because the customer though is dictating that, right? The customer
True,
wants
true.
something familiar, right?
Yeah.
So, you could say you could be a, really avant-garde, super inventive, and you just want it to be different for different sake. But that doesn't make any business sense whatsoever because the customer wants the DNA of that brand. And so you have to retain that brand identity as you evolve your products into the future. And you can never lose that. Otherwise, you're going to lose your customer. And so I think it's critical that you always remember that the real object that people want drives a lot of the creation part of the beginning, right? And I don't like to get too much fine art thinking in the industrial design gears because they don't really play that well together. And I don't actually look for a lot of artistic satisfaction out of the day job doing industrial design. That's a hobby, that's fun. And AI doesn't preclude you from doing all your own art. Because nothing's being taken away. It's like, no, it's just added value to explore, but you don't have to use it. You can work traditionally, you can do whatever you want to do. It's not a either or situation.
Yeah. Yeah, kind of like, at least the way I see it anyways, just another tool. It's like a really advanced marker.
Yeah, well, it's a little bit more than that, but yes, it is.
Yeah.
For sure, it can be. You can start that way, but
well, tool is in the sense that not necessarily something to fear, right? But rather embrace.
Yeah, there's both sides. If you embrace it, you fear it less. So
true.
Yeah, and I think you said something really important there, Scott, that it's kind of like helping the designers bring some other ideas, explore other things that maybe they're not thinking about. What it is not doing, which is kind of like the actual job of an industrial designer, right? Like solving a problem, figuring out how this actual like object or product is going to work out. How do you actually like communicate with the engineers and with the marketing people and so on. So it's really just kind of like the beginning stages of just prompting some ideas for you to continue with your workflow.
Yeah, it's really hard to get companies to spend money on blue sky activities, right? At the beginning and even though they have an R&D department and yeah, we're all about innovation, but as soon as it comes to paying checks for any period of time to get anything productive, first thing to get that gets cut is the blue sky investigations, right? So because the opportunity cost for a company to explore a wide range of ideas using these new tool sets, right, is incredibly inexpensive. Now the things I'm seeing flow out of the community are super original and cost very, very little. So it's like this creativity hose, right? That just has nonstop flow to it. How you handle that flow of volume of images, right, is another thing entirely. You have to learn how to switch things off.
Yeah, you were saying you have thousands of images.
I do have thousands, yeah, and it's totally overwhelming on the one hand, and on the other, it's completely inspiring.